Penn Assurance Software, OIPA Debugger, Troubleshooting Transaction Exceptions. Occasionally, but infrequently, transactions in OIPA will fail with an exception. When this happens, someone needs to troubleshoot the problem. The first step is to identify the source of the exception. In this example, we can see there is an exception in the do math part of the transaction. Let's trace the transaction in the Penn Assurance Software OIPA Debugger. Start by getting the activity GUID of the failing activity from the database query tool. Paste the activity GUID into the debugger and click Run. The large editor box in the debugger will be populated with a trace of the activity math along with the exception that gets thrown when the activity fails. We can see in this stack trace that the variable daysDiff of end date and next SWD date is failing. The debugger also tells us the GUID of the business rule that contains the failing math variable. Let's copy the GUID from the stack trace and find the rule name from the database query tool. The offending rule is copybook SWD. Next, let's find the rule in the palette. Once we have the rule, we want to see if we can find the daysDiff of end date and next SWD date math variable that is failing. We also know from the stack trace that the function daysDiff of is failing, so we should expect the math variable definition to be calling that function. When we search for the variable name in the rule XML, we find two matches. Only one of the matches is a math variable definition though, so that is very likely our failing math variable. After inspecting the exception message and the math variable definition, it appears that SWD end date is null. Let's go back to the debugger and see what happened right before the exception occurred in the transaction math. We can see there is a math if statement right before the failed math variable that was evaluated to true. Let's take a closer look at that math if in the copybook rule in the palette. This is strange. The math if is checking that SWD end date is empty. I think the author intended to say if SWD end date is not empty. Let's change the copybook rule to do the correct math if check and check in our changes. After checking in our changes, let's test them by executing the activity in the debugger. Click the Run button to trace the failing activity again. This time the trace XML shows in the large edit box with no stack trace. This means it was successful. We can confirm the transaction is working again by navigating back to our test policy in the OIPA application and processing the pending activity. After making our change, the previously failing activity runs successfully. That concludes this example of troubleshooting an exception in transaction math using the Penn Assurance Software OIPA Debugger.